we've installed OpenRefine and opened our data set, we can actually get started using it. So you should have something like this open from having imported the Safi data set. Let's see. Safi underscore openrefine.csv. Right, so you have that, and you can check there. It usually gives it the same name as the file name for the project, and you can see the number of rows over here, and you are then ready to go. Okay, so a reminder that we are now working on the data carpentry workshop, working with OpenRefine, and this is what we'll be doing in this video. So it's quite a lot of things, quite a lot of activities. Every now and then we'll come back to having a look at an exercise together. So those you'll be adding your answers to the Etherpad. So this is our first exercise has got to do with using facets. All right, and we're going to be diving right in to find some errors, data entry errors in our data set. Okay, so let's go back to OpenRefine. Remember, OpenRefine has the diamond logo. If you kind of closed your application since you did the installation, go and click on the diamond logo for the application to get started, and remember it runs in your browser. So if you can't find it, just check your open browser window to see. It should look something like this. Right, so we are going to get started by looking at the different villages. So remember, these are the Mozambican villages where the interviewees or the participants in the study, in the Safi study, and where they lived. So the names of the villages are God, Chirodzo, and Ruaka. Please let me know if you have better knowledge than I do of the pronunciation. But for us to be able to check how good the data is here from the data entry process from all the different field workers, we would need to create a facet, and we're going to use a text facet because this is text or categorical data. So creating the facet pops up this little window on the left here. As you can see, it's the column village column, and then you can sort the data by clicking on these two links here. So sort it by name, and you'll get the alphabetical list of the categories in the data, and then count shows you what are the most often used ones. Right, so this is very helpful, and it should immediately show you that there's some issues with this data. So please go and add your own answer here. What did you spot? What data errors did you spot in the village column? And once you've worked that out, pause the video, and then you can come back and we'll continue with this. Right. So we are going to go and address that question together. Let's have a look. So looking here, just quickly, you can see obviously there's a 49 there. That's a real issue. Definitely not the name of a village. And then you can see there's some variation in the spelling. So Chidozo and Ruka So that's popped up twice, and this one pops up once. And then you've got slight variations of the name with different spaces, etc. So these all come up as a separate facet, what we call a facet. And OpenRefine is great at being able to, reconcile slightly different variations of a category name. So let's have a look at our notes and see what the next step is here with creating our project using facets. So we've identified the errors here, and it is possible to use OpenRefine to fix errors. So for instance, if you wanted to correct the spelling, you could just press edit and go and change it yourself and then apply. But that's obviously quite a manual method, and we are going to look at some other ways to fix them when we're learning about clustering. Our next step is to have a look at the other types of facets that are available. And for this one, we are going to ask, when were the farmers interviewed? Right, so to be able to use facets to answer that, we'd need to go back to the data set and maybe go and check our metadata. So when were they interviewed? What tells us that? That's the date of the interview. Okay, so interview date, that is in our first row here, right? So the interview date, we'd want to facet, but if we used text facet, that's obviously not really what we're looking at. So you get these separate dates. It treats it kind of like a piece of text, which is not, it's kind of, it is a piece of text, I guess, but we want to handle that as a date, as a different type of data. And so to do that, we use what we call a transform. This actually changes the data. Common transforms changes it to a date, right? So you see it turns green there, and then it's possible to use what we call a numeric facet. Sorry, that's for numbers. For dates is the timeline facet. Okay, so you can see that looks quite different to the text facet because it gives us a timeline here. And so instead of having to scroll through a whole bunch of dates, it is possible to see, oh, wow, there are these 2 periods where most of the interviews were conducted. So in the first one, over here, you've got 88 interviews, and then a bit later, in April, you've got 40, so about a third of them were conducted in April, and then the others the previous year in November. Okay, so the facet lets you explore, and if you look carefully, you'll see your data that's being displayed changes according to what's in your facet. So here you've got 89. If you went down there, you would have 88. And it also shows you the, say, if interviews were being conducted, you can see they're being conducted with all the different villages at the same time. So it's not like they went from one village to another. So they had teams of interviewers probably going, or they brought people from the villages to the same interview place. So yeah, you can see that they're all represented here in the second time period as well. Right. So looking here, what's that one that was done at a slightly different time was in Gerodzo. Okay. So here you've only got one displaying. So it's kind of to understand how you can get these different facets to interact with one another, and then be able to see just that data there. Right, that is the timeline facet. Numeric facet is similar, but it works for numbers. And you first have to change that data to the right type of data to be able to use that. So what we haven't looked at is, okay, we haven't really got our clusters finalized yet, but we're looking at how to interact with the facets. So once we've cleaned it, we'll be able to use this to just look, for example, at the Chirodza data or the Ruaka data if we're doing want to do a separate analysis for each village. So that's how you would do that, right? Have we covered everything here? Using the faceting, right? When were they? Right, so we've converted our data to dates and we've checked when the interviews were collected. So go and type your answer if you want to get to this point. And yeah, there are other types of data as well, and I think we've asked you to look to answer a question about that, other types of facets. So those are called custom facets, and I want you to think about that for your own research. Right. In addition, you could have numeric facets, timeline facets, custom facets, scatter plot facets. So have a look at whether you think any of those would be helpful for your research. There are also things like word facets. So I don't think we have any unstructured data here. But say if you were studying social media and you had YouTube captions or TikTok captions, you would be able to break down text into words, count the number of records each word appears in, for example. Finding duplicates, that's pretty helpful. Giving you the length of the number of characters of the text. So for instance, if you've got, I suppose, phone numbers and you want to check that some of those haven't been entered incorrectly, you know how long a phone number is supposed to be. And then really important, missing values. So we've talked about the problems that are associated with missing values. Let's see if there are any missing values. We did see all those nulls, but let's say, for instance, we wanted to check where the village it by null. Okay, so there are no nulls. Null is false. So we've got entries for the village, the name of the village for every single interview. Right. That is the first big step in using OpenRefine is how to use faceting. Our next step is to think about transforming data, right? So let's have a look here. What changes have we actually made? If we look here, we've only created one step, and that is when we changed our values to dates. So it would be quite handy if we're getting interviews, say, from a couple of different countries, and we're going to want to do faceting on them to be able to convert the data into the type of data that we want. So that's why it's quite handy to have that step recorded separately for us there. We're going to come back to the undo redo list. If we wanted to keep our facets, text facet for example, and keep that view, that's actually the districts, we could save that as a permalink, and that way when we come back to this file we'll be able to see, let's put in another one here, We'll be able to see our timeline and our district every time we open up there. So click permalink if you want to be able to see these things, because they are not going to be saved in the undo redo list. They're just views of the data. All right, I think let me get rid of these so that we can not confuse ourselves. It's always important to know exactly what it is that you're working with when you're in OpenRefine. Right, so that's how to bookmark it with the permalink. Great. What we can do now is use the power of clustering. So these are algorithms, clustering algorithms that are built into OpenRefine, which help us to spot specific types of problems. So clustering can be very helpful when you're using when there's misspelling or mistyping, and we are going to have a bit of help here. So in terms of knowing which algorithm to use, so the first one that they suggest is for us to use the key collision method and the metaphone 3 keying function to identify 2 clusters. Right, so let's see what happens when we do that. We're clustering the villages, remember, with all those spelling errors. Right. So start by pressing cluster, and then we're using a key collision method, and not fingerprint but metaphone 3. Right, and that looks like it's been quite good at spotting these 2. So yes, we do want to merge these so they're the same village. Of course, you need to have the knowledge of your data to be able to do that. But in this case, we're happy with that. So merge selected and recluster. No clusters were found. So it gets to a point where it can't identify any more spelling errors. But if we have a look back here, we'll see now that we have got somewhere with that. And so we've got rid of some of the extra problems, but we can try a couple of the other methods. So let's see what the lesson suggests. We are going to try this particular method that they suggest. So it suggests nearest neighbor method with ppm distance radius bigger than or equal to 4 and block characters smaller than or equal to 4. Right, let's see whether we can do that. So nearest neighbor method. Right, and I think let's put in the 4 and the 4 that they recommend here. Did I remember correctly? Okay, so this does find that one for us. Right, so we're doing well there. I think we've done everything that they recommend, and might manually have to change Chirdozo and Chirodzo, Ruaka Namenda to Ruaka. Okay, so we want to end up with the 4 clusters. Close. So this one we can just change to Ruaka. And that's it. Right, so we were able to do most of the work with the automated clustering. And if we have a look here, it has now saved those edits as a result of the clustering. Right, so that's quite handy that we've saved the manual changes that we've made, and we're able to use them again if necessary. Right, so go back to where we were, or we can go and see the final version of it. So we still have this one weird 49, but it's going to take more than clustering to be able to figure out what went wrong with that village name. Okay, so let's see, we would now, I don't think I've got any questions for you about this. I didn't put them in the sheet at any rate about clustering, but make sure that you've done the clustering, and then we're going to go on to some more interesting questions, which we can do with custom text facets. Okay. First, though, we're going to have to learn how to transform data. Right, so what are we aiming to do? We have got these, if you scroll across your sheet and you come to this column with items owned. So this is in the interview talking to villagers about their assets, pretty much what they owned. And you'll see here, this is in kind of a weird format, and we would also want to be able to, if we facet it, it's not super useful to us because you've got a whole list of items in sort of kind of looks like a sort of Python format with a whole lot of characters that we don't want to use. And then instead of faceting by the whole cell, we would want to break down so we can see the total number of bicycles separately. Right, so this is pretty much not what we'd want to be doing with the text facet. We're going to have to do a bit more work before we can figure out I do apologize for struggling with the to click these tiny little buttons. Okay, what are we going to do? We can't use a facet, so we are going to use a transformation. Again, we are going to go to this little arrow here, and instead of using facets, we are now going to edit the cells. So edit cells takes us to transform, and in the past we used common transforms when we changed the date to a date. Here we're going to do our own transformation, and like the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and get rid of those square brackets, so these lots of extra characters here, and we're going to just replace, it's called value.replace as a function. And because it's a function, just like the functions that we saw in Excel, we've got these round brackets, and in the brackets you put your parameters. So what do you want to replace? That's your first parameter. And because it's text, we always put it in inverted commas. So you can follow along and just type the things as I type them. What we want to replace is the square bracket, and then the second parameter, show the second parameter by putting in a comma, and in this case we don't want to replace it with anything. So if we wanted to replace it with, say, a star, that's how you would do it, right? So you'd see then each row starts with a star, but that's not what we're doing. We just delete that star because we want to get rid of it, so replace it with nothing. Right, so value.replace, and then you say there what it is that you're replacing and what you want to replace it with. Great. So press OK and let's see what happens. Fantastic. So all the way down, we can go all the way down to end of the data set. It has done that for us. So that would have been a lot of manual editing. And I'm going to leave you to figure out how to get rid of this other square brackets and those inverted commas and any spaces in there. So pause the video now and then come back once you've been able to get rid of those characters yourself. Okay, I hope you've been able to get rid of the other characters. If you were getting funny errors, don't feel bad. It is quite tricky and quite difficult to read when you have lots, especially when you're working with characters. So our first value that we want to replace is the other square bracket. Then we have a comma and we're going to replace it with nothing. Right, so let's go through that step by step. Did you get that? Right, were you able to do that? That's great. Value dot replace. That's the function, right? We're replacing something with something else. Then we've got the round brackets, and the first item that we're going to replace is square bracket, comma, and then the second parameter, what we want to replace it with, is nothing. Right, so there we go. By now you might be realizing you can just cut and paste these because it's the same steps. Right, so here you can see you've recorded that. So if you wanted to, you could go and copy your bit of text there. Right, so there are ways of stacking. So being able to do a lot of these steps in one. But I'd recommend, so that you can still see what's happening, that you do it manually. So I'm just doing the single quotes first to get rid of those. So that looks good. There we go. And then the last one to get rid of is the space characters. Sorry, I think I pressed the wrong thing. Okay, doing it one by one. Here we go. Right. So our facets now don't have all those extra characters. We've got rid of the annoying extra characters, but we still can't see how many bicycles were earned, for example. Or what was our question? Which two items are the most commonly owned? All right, so we're going to come back to that. But at this stage, after we've removed the characters, try to explain why did we do that? Why would we want to remove the unwanted characters? If that's not obvious yet, just hang in there. We'll do the next step and then it should be clear. And then also think about your own data. If you have data where you've got characters that you want to remove, what function would you use to get rid of them? Right, so I'll give you a minute to go and do that. Pause the video, get that done, and then we'll come back here and see whether we can answer the question, what were the most commonly owned items? Right, so let's have a look. If we use a different type of facet, a custom text facet, we might be in luck. But here what we want to do is split our list using the semicolon. So the semicolon is what's splitting the list. Value.split is our function. Value.split, and in this case there's only one parameter, and that's the character that we're using to split the list. So this looks good. It's a bit confusing because kind of going back to those square brackets, but essentially what that means is it's constructing a list which is split. You can see there you've got commas now between the different items. To see how it's working, actually it's better to just say OK, and you'll see we now have the list that we were wanting, sorted by count and sorted by name. And I will leave you, so pause the video and see whether you can go and create your own custom facet like that. So remember where it was, facet, custom text facet, and you can then answer the questions in the Etherpad. So what are the most commonly owned items, and what are the two least commonly owned items? And after that, you can go and do the next question all by yourself and go and see, yeah, this is a very sad, kind of sobering reality when you look at this data set. They interviewed the farmers about the months where they went hungry, where they lacked food, and then also what strategies they had to mitigate the lack of food. But here you'd be able to work out which months were those dire months where they went hungry by using that same strategy that we just used to do the custom text facet. So I will leave you to go and do that and see first steps that you have to do. Those have got to do with removing your extra characters, and then the second steps are to do with using the custom facet. Right. One thing I haven't shown you is, actually my students do this quite a lot, is once they have got their custom text facets, they export this and often just create a graph from that. So it's kind of content analysis, I suppose, which media students use. So what they would do is select that data, and then I suppose something like sheets will be easier to show you. Just quickly in the browser. So paste right there, and then insert your chart. So this is quite handy to get a quick look, right? So that is a bit of a shortcut to getting a chart of the data. And the way you do that is by viewing the 18 choices and then copying and pasting it. Right, you could also paste it into a text file. What you see here is this is tab separated values, so that's why it works to paste it directly into the spreadsheet. That's a bit of a shortcut. Okay, I think that is the end of the transformation and use of custom text facets. So I'll end the video here, and then we'll wrap up with some of the additional techniques for OpenRefine.